What if I told you that your sensitivity, the very thing you've been taught to see as weakness, is actually the raw material for developing the most powerful form of psychological strength known to humanity? Jung discovered something revolutionary about highly sensitive individuals that completely reframes everything we think we know about emotional resilience. Most empaths spend their entire lives apologizing for their depth of feeling, trying to toughen up or build thicker skin. But Jung's work revealed that this approach is not only backwards, it's psychologically destructive. The attempt to suppress or diminish sensitivity actually fragments the personality and creates the very weakness that empaths fear. Here's what completely shifted my understanding of empathic psychology. Jung found that sensitivity isn't a character flaw to overcome, but a sophisticated neurological gift that, when properly integrated, creates what he called conscious strength, a form of resilience that's actually impossible for less sensitive individuals to achieve. Jung worked with an individual who had spent decades believing their emotional intensity was a curse. This person could walk into a room and immediately sense the underlying tensions, unspoken conflicts, and hidden pain of everyone present. Instead of seeing this as a gift, they experienced it as overwhelming burden that left them exhausted and emotionally depleted. But Jung recognized something profound in this sensitivity. He saw that this person possessed what he termed psychic porosity, the ability to perceive subtle, energetic, and emotional information that most people completely miss. The problem wasn't the sensitivity itself, but the lack of conscious framework for processing and utilizing this information constructively. Real talk, this insight fundamentally changed how I view empathic psychology. What Jung discovered was that sensitivity, when consciously developed, creates access to what he called the collective unconscious, the deeper layers of human experience that contain profound wisdom about healing, creativity, and authentic connection. The key breakthrough came when Jung realized that empaths aren't just feeling their own emotions, they're unconsciously accessing the emotional field of their environment. This creates what he called undifferentiated absorption, where the empath takes on others' psychological contents without realizing it. This absorption creates the appearance of weakness, but it's actually evidence of extraordinary perceptual ability. Between you and me, most therapeutic approaches completely miss this fundamental truth. They try to help empaths manage their sensitivity rather than teaching them how to transform it into conscious strength. It's like teaching someone to dim a powerful spotlight instead of showing them how to focus its beam. Jung's approach was revolutionary because he understood that sensitivity is actually a form of intelligence, what he called feeling intelligence, that operates through intuitive perception rather than logical analysis. When properly developed, this intelligence becomes incredibly precise and practically invaluable. The transformation process involves what Jung termed conscious sensitivity, learning to distinguish between your authentic emotional responses and the environmental emotions you're unconsciously absorbing. This differentiation doesn't diminish your empathic abilities. It amplifies them by giving you conscious control over your perceptual processes. I've witnessed this transformation firsthand, and it's extraordinary. The empath doesn't become less sensitive, they become strategically sensitive. They retain their ability to perceive subtle emotional information, but they develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty over how they process and respond to that information. Let me paint you a picture of what this transformation looks like in practice. Imagine an empath who previously would become overwhelmed in crowded spaces, absorbing everyone's anxiety, frustration, and emotional chaos. After developing conscious sensitivity, they can still perceive all that emotional information, but now they experience it as data rather than personal burden. They might walk into that same crowded space and think, "I'm sensing a lot of collective anxiety here. People seem stressed about their daily pressures." There's also some underlying excitement, maybe anticipation about upcoming events. I can feel this information without taking it on as my own experience. This shift creates what Jung described as empathic mastery, the ability to use your sensitivity as a conscious tool rather than being victimized by it. You become like an emotional scientist, gathering and analyzing information while maintaining clear boundaries about what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Here's what blew my mind when I fully understood this concept. The strength that emerges from integrated sensitivity is qualitatively different from conventional resilience. Most people develop strength by building psychological armor, learning to shut out difficult emotions and experiences. But empaths develop what Jung called permeable strength, the ability to remain open and receptive while maintaining psychological integrity. This permeable strength allows empaths to navigate challenging situations with remarkable grace and effectiveness. Because they can perceive the emotional undercurrents of any situation, they can respond with precision and wisdom that seems almost supernatural to others. Jung worked with someone who exemplified this transformation. This individual had previously avoided conflict at all costs because they could feel everyone's pain so intensely. After developing conscious sensitivity, they became incredibly effective at facilitating difficult conversations and resolving disputes because they could sense exactly what each person needed to feel heard and understood. The key insight here is that sensitivity provides access to emotional intelligence that most people never develop. You can perceive not just what people are feeling, but why they're feeling it, what they need, and how different responses might affect their emotional state. This creates tremendous strategic advantage in all forms of human interaction. But this gets even deeper. Jung discovered that highly sensitive individuals often possess what he called archetypal sensitivity, the ability to perceive the deeper psychological patterns that drive human behavior. This allows them to understand not just individual emotional states, but the collective psychological forces that shape entire groups and communities. You know that feeling when you sense something important happening beneath the surface of a conversation or situation? That's your archetypal sensitivity picking up on deeper psychological currents. Most people dismiss these perceptions as imagination, but Jung recognized them as access to profound psychological wisdom. Now I need to share something crucial about the transformation process. Developing conscious sensitivity requires what Jung called ego strengthening, building a stable sense of self that can maintain integrity while remaining permeable to others' experiences. Many empaths resist this process because they've been conditioned to believe that having strong boundaries means becoming selfish or disconnected. But Jung understood that the opposite is true. Only when you have a strong, stable sense of self can you safely open to others' experiences without losing yourself in the process. If you're still with me, it means you're ready to explore the practical framework for this transformation. Jung developed what I call the Sensitivity Integration Protocol, a systematic approach to transforming empathic overwhelm into conscious strength. The protocol operates on 4 distinct levels: perceptual refinement, emotional alchemy, archetypal attunement, and strength consolidation. Each level builds upon the previous one to create increasingly sophisticated forms of empathic mastery. Perceptual refinement involves learning to distinguish between different types of emotional information you're receiving. Jung discovered that empaths often experience what he called emotional soup, a confused mixture of their own feelings and absorbed environmental emotions. The refinement process teaches you to identify the source and nature of each emotional experience. The practice begins with what Jung termed emotional archaeology, systematically examining your emotional experiences to determine their origin. When you feel anxious, you ask, is this my anxiety about my own situation, or am I picking up someone else's stress? If it's absorbed emotion, whose might it be, and what might be causing it? This inquiry process gradually develops what Jung called empathic discernment, the ability to accurately perceive and categorize emotional information. You begin to recognize the unique emotional signatures of different people and situations, which allows you to respond more appropriately to each. I wish I could see your face right now as this concept clicks into place. The moment you realize you can distinguish between your authentic emotions and absorbed ones, you reclaim tremendous psychological freedom and energy. Jung worked with individuals who practiced what he called emotional mapping, creating internal charts of the emotional landscapes they encountered. They would mentally note patterns like, "When I'm around my colleague Sarah, I tend to feel inexplicably sad. She must be carrying grief she doesn't express directly. When I'm in staff meetings, I feel aggressive. The team is probably frustrated about unaddressed workplace issues." This mapping process transforms chaotic emotional experiences into useful information that can guide your responses and interactions. Instead of being overwhelmed by others' emotions, you become skilled at understanding and working with emotional dynamics. Jung discovered that empaths who master perceptual refinement often develop what he called emotional X-ray vision, the ability to see through surface presentations, to understand what people are actually experiencing underneath. This capacity becomes incredibly valuable in all forms of human interaction. The refinement process also involves learning what Jung termed selective empathy, the conscious choice of when and how deeply to tune into others' emotional states. Instead of being at the mercy of whatever emotional information is present, you develop the ability to choose your level of empathic engagement based on what serves the situation. One individual Jung worked with described this as learning to operate their sensitivity like a sophisticated radio. They could adjust the frequency, volume, and clarity of their empathic reception based on what information they needed to gather. This gave them tremendous control over their emotional experience while maintaining their natural gifts. Emotional alchemy is the second level of the protocol. This involves learning to transform difficult emotions, both your own and absorbed ones, into psychological wisdom and strength. Jung discovered that emotions contain specific types of information and energy that can be consciously utilized. The alchemical process begins with what Jung called emotional witnessing, the ability to observe and experience emotions without being controlled by them. This doesn't mean suppressing or avoiding emotions. It means developing what he termed conscious relationship with emotional experiences. Here's where it gets really fascinating. Jung found that each emotion carries what he called archetypal wisdom, information about human needs, values, and psychological development. Anger contains information about boundaries and self-advocacy. Sadness carries wisdom about loss, attachment, and the need for comfort. Fear provides data about potential threats and the need for safety or preparation. When empaths learn to decode the archetypal wisdom within emotions, they gain access to incredibly sophisticated guidance for navigating life's challenges. You begin to see emotions not as problems to solve, but as allies providing essential information. Let me share a powerful example of this process. Jung worked with someone who frequently absorbed others' anger and felt overwhelmed by aggressive energy. Through emotional alchemy, they learned to decode the anger and discover what boundary violations or unmet needs it was signaling. This allowed them to address underlying issues rather than just trying to escape the emotional intensity. The transformation was remarkable. Instead of avoiding angry people or situations, this individual became skilled at facilitating healing conversations that addressed the root causes of conflict. Their sensitivity to anger became a therapeutic gift rather than a burden. The alchemical process also involves what Jung called emotional transmutation, the ability to transform lower frequency emotions into higher frequency ones through conscious engagement. This doesn't mean denying difficult emotions, but rather working with them to extract their wisdom and transform their energy. Jung discovered that empaths who master emotional alchemy often become what he called emotional healers, individuals who can help others process and transform their own difficult emotions through skilled empathic presence and wisdom. Archetypal attunement is the third level of the sensitivity integration protocol. This involves learning to perceive and work with what Jung called archetypal energies, the deeper psychological forces that shape human experience. Jung discovered that highly sensitive individuals often have natural access to archetypal perception, the ability to sense the deeper psychological patterns operating in themselves and others. This might manifest as intuitive understanding of someone's life purpose, recognition of their developmental challenges, or perception of their hidden potential. The attunement process involves developing conscious relationship with archetypal energies like the healer, the warrior, the sage, the lover, and others. You learn to recognize when these energies are active in yourself or others and how to work with them constructively. This creates what Jung called archetypal intelligence, the ability to understand human behavior and motivation at the deepest levels. You begin to see the bigger picture of psychological development and can offer insight and support that addresses people's core needs rather than just surface symptoms. I bet this is starting to feel eerily familiar, those moments when you've had profound insights about someone's psychological needs or life direction that you couldn't quite explain logically. That's your archetypal attunement operating naturally. The practical application of archetypal attunement involves what Jung called sacred witnessing, holding space for others' psychological development without trying to control or fix their process. You become what he termed a midwife of consciousness, someone who can sense what's trying to emerge in another person and support that emergence. Jung worked with individuals who developed the ability to perceive what he called archetypal constellations, the specific combinations of archetypal energies that were active in different people at different times. This allowed them to understand not just what someone was experiencing, but what they were meant to learn or develop through their experiences. The attunement process also involves learning to embody different archetypal energies consciously. Instead of being unconsciously possessed by archetypal forces, you develop the ability to invoke specific energies when they're needed for particular situations. Strength consolidation is the final level of the sensitivity integration protocol. This involves integrating all the previous levels into a stable, sustainable way of being that allows you to function as what Jung called a conscious empath in all areas of life. The consolidation process involves what Jung termed psychological synthesis, bringing together all aspects of your empathic abilities into a coherent, powerful whole. This creates what he called integrated sensitivity, a state where your empathic gifts enhance rather than overwhelm your daily functioning. Jung discovered that empaths who achieve strength consolidation often experience what he called empathic sovereignty, complete mastery over their empathic abilities combined with unshakable psychological strength. They become individuals who can navigate any emotional environment with wisdom and grace. This is probably hitting close to home right now because you're recognizing your own natural abilities. Most empaths have been using these capacities unconsciously, which is why they feel overwhelming. The integration process makes these abilities conscious and therefore manageable. What I'm about to share with you is the daily practice framework that supports this transformation. Jung emphasized that developing conscious sensitivity requires what he called spiritual discipline, regular practices that strengthen your psychological container while keeping you open to subtle perception. The practice framework involves 4 daily components: centering, scanning, integration, and consolidation. Each component serves a specific function in developing empathic mastery. Centering involves what Jung called psychological anchoring, connecting with your core sense of self before engaging with others' emotional fields. This might involve meditation, breath work, or simply spending time in conscious relationship with your own authentic feelings and needs. The centering practice creates what Jung termed psychological gravity, a stable inner reference point that allows you to remain yourself while perceiving others' experiences. Without this anchoring, empaths tend to lose themselves in others' emotional states. Jung worked with individuals who developed sophisticated centering practices that could be done anywhere, anytime. They might take 3 conscious breaths while mentally reconnecting with their core values, or spend 30 seconds feeling their feet on the ground while asking themselves, who am I in this moment, beyond all the emotional information I'm receiving? Scanning is the practice of consciously perceiving emotional and energetic information in your environment. Instead of unconsciously absorbing whatever emotional content is present, you deliberately tune in to gather specific information that can guide your responses. Jung taught individuals to practice what he called conscious empathy, deliberately opening to perceive others' experiences while maintaining awareness of your own psychological boundaries. This allows you to gather emotional intelligence without becoming overwhelmed or contaminated. The scanning practice involves what Jung called empathic inquiry, asking specific questions to guide your perception. You might mentally ask, what is this person really feeling beneath their surface presentation? What do they need most right now? How can I be most helpful in this situation? Integration involves processing and utilizing the emotional information you've gathered. This might include journaling about your perceptions, discussing insights with trusted friends, or using the information to guide your interactions and decisions. The integration practice transforms random emotional experiences into conscious wisdom that enhances your ability to navigate relationships and life challenges effectively. Jung emphasized that integration must be done regularly, not just when you feel overwhelmed. He found that empaths who processed their empathic experiences daily maintained much better psychological balance than those who only dealt with their sensitivity when it became problematic. Consolidation involves reinforcing and stabilizing your empathic mastery through regular practice and conscious application. This includes celebrating your growth, acknowledging your increasing skill, and consciously using your abilities to serve others and contribute to healing in the world. The consolidation practice helps you embody what Jung called empathic confidence, absolute trust in your ability to navigate any emotional environment while maintaining your psychological integrity and using your gifts constructively. Here's where it gets really personal. The transformation from empathic overwhelm to conscious strength requires what Jung called psychological courage, the willingness to fully embrace your sensitivity rather than trying to minimize or escape it. Most empaths have been conditioned to see their depth of feeling as a problem to solve rather than a gift to develop. This conditioning creates what Jung called sensitivity shame, the unconscious belief that your natural way of processing the world is somehow wrong or excessive. Healing this shame is essential for accessing your authentic strength. Jung found that when empaths fully embrace their sensitivity and learn to use it consciously, they often become some of the most psychologically powerful and effective individuals he encountered. The strength that emerges isn't the brittle toughness of emotional armor, but what Jung called diamond clarity, a form of resilience that can withstand tremendous pressure while remaining transparent to truth and wisdom. Jung worked with someone who perfectly exemplified this transformation. This individual had spent years trying to fix their sensitivity through various methods: therapy, medication, spiritual practices aimed at becoming less empathic. Nothing worked because they were trying to eliminate their gift rather than develop it. When they finally embraced their sensitivity and learned to use it consciously, everything changed. They discovered they had an extraordinary ability to facilitate healing in others, to create safe spaces for emotional processing, and to guide people through difficult psychological transitions. Their sensitivity became their greatest professional and personal asset. The key insight was that their attempts to reduce their sensitivity had actually been weakening them. When they learned to strengthen their psychological container while maintaining their empathic abilities, they became incredibly resilient and effective. All right, here's where I tie everything together for you. The journey from empathic overwhelm to conscious strength isn't about changing who you are. It's about becoming who you truly are when your gifts are fully integrated and consciously expressed. Your sensitivity isn't something to overcome. It's the foundation for developing forms of wisdom, creativity, and healing capacity that are simply unavailable to less sensitive individuals. When properly integrated, your empathic abilities become your greatest source of personal power and your most valuable contribution to the world. The integration process requires daily practice and unwavering commitment to psychological development, but the results are extraordinary. You become what Jung called a conscious empath, someone who can perceive and work with subtle psychological information while maintaining complete psychological sovereignty. I'm about to give you the roadmap I wish every empath had access to from the beginning. The daily practices that support this transformation are both simple and profound, requiring nothing more than willingness to engage with your sensitivity consciously rather than reactively. The morning centering practice involves spending 10-15 minutes connecting with your authentic emotional state before engaging with others. This might include meditation, journaling, or simply sitting quietly and asking, "How am I feeling right now? What do I need today? What is my authentic emotional baseline?" The conscious scanning practice involves deliberately tuning in to emotional information throughout the day while maintaining awareness of your psychological boundaries. When you enter new environments or interact with others, you might mentally ask, "What emotional information am I receiving? What belongs to me and what belongs to others? How can this information guide my responses?" The evening integration practice involves processing the emotional information you've gathered during the day. This might include journaling about your perceptions, discussing insights with trusted friends, or simply reflecting on how your empathic abilities served you and others. The weekly consolidation practice involves reviewing your progress, celebrating your growth, and setting intentions for continued development. This helps you maintain momentum and recognize how your empathic mastery is expanding over time. Jung emphasized that these practices must be approached with what he called sacred intention, the recognition that developing conscious sensitivity is not just personal development, but a form of service to collective human consciousness. When empaths learn to use their abilities consciously, they become what Jung called psychological bridges, individuals who can facilitate understanding and healing between different people, groups, and even different aspects of the collective psyche. The integration process typically unfolds in predictable stages. Initially, you might feel disoriented as you begin to distinguish between your own emotions and absorbed ones. This is followed by a period of what Jung called empathic apprenticeship, learning to work with your abilities more skillfully. The intermediate stage involves what Jung termed empathic proficiency, developing reliable skill in using your sensitivity constructively. You begin to trust your perceptions and use them to guide your responses and decisions. The final stage involves what Jung called empathic mastery, a stable integration where your sensitivity becomes a reliable source of wisdom and strength rather than overwhelm and vulnerability. Jung found that empaths who achieved this mastery often described feeling like they had finally come home to themselves. They no longer apologized for their depth or tried to hide their sensitivity. Instead, they celebrated it as their greatest gift and used it consciously to contribute to healing and wisdom in the world. Look, after everything we've explored together, you have a choice to make. You can continue seeing your sensitivity as a burden to manage, or you can embrace it as the foundation for developing extraordinary psychological abilities. This isn't about quick fixes or surface-level coping strategies. This is about fundamental transformation that turns your greatest apparent weakness into your most powerful strength. If you're ready to take this seriously, then your next step is clear. You need to begin the perceptual refinement process immediately. Start by practicing emotional archaeology, examining your emotional experiences to determine their origin and meaning. I just shared with you insights that took me years to understand and integrate. The question now is whether you're willing to commit to the daily practices that will transform your relationship with your sensitivity. Are you ready to stop apologizing for your depth and start using it as the foundation for unbreakable strength? Because half measures won't create the transformation you're seeking. This work requires everything, but it gives you back your authentic power as a conscious empath. The choice is yours, but choose consciously. Your psychological development and your capacity to serve others through your gifts depends on the decision you make right now. This is your moment to step into the truth of who you really are when your sensitivity is fully embraced and consciously expressed. The world needs conscious empaths now more than ever, and you have the potential to become exactly that.